You're 18 years old, you're in college, and you're not exactly lighting the world on fire. You're getting average grades, and your professors don't pull you aside to tell you you're special. You don't have some burning vision of your future. You're just there, going through the motions, not failing, but not exactly distinguishing yourself either. And then one afternoon, you pick up a book, not because someone told you to, and not because it was assigned, just because it was sitting there and something on the cover caught your eye. You read it in basically one sitting, and when you put it down, something has shifted. Some quiet little voice inside you says, I want to be like those people. Except, here's the problem. The people in the book went to military academies and Ivy League schools. They were exceptional students, decorated, serious, and you are not any of those things. So now, what do you do with that? Scott Kelly is probably best known for spending nearly a year aboard the International Space Station, 340 consecutive days in space. That's the accomplishment most people know him for. It's the part of the story that gets all the attention. But the part of his story that nobody talks about nearly enough is what happened before any of that. The part where he was an 18-year-old kid at a maritime college in the Bronx with unremarkable grades and no particular direction. And he stumbled across Tom Wolfe's book, The Right Stuff. If you haven't read it, the book follows the original Mercury astronauts and the test pilots who came before them. Wolfe wrote it in this vivid, immersive nonfiction style. You feel like you're actually inside their heads. And something about those guys clicked for Kelly. Their risk-taking, their attitude, their sense of adventure. He felt like he could actually relate to them. And then he looked at their credentials, and he looked at his own, and the gap was enormous. Here's what he said about it later. He went from being an average, underperforming student at 18 to flying in space exactly 18 years later. And he called it, in his own words, a pretty remarkable comeback. What's interesting about that description is that Kelly himself saw it as a comeback story. So if you tell the story to most people, they'll extract the obvious lesson. Work hard, stay focused, and you can achieve anything. Maybe they'll add, you just need to find the right motivation. And sure, fine, none of that is wrong exactly. But it's also kind of the least interesting version of what actually happened here. Because if the lesson were just work harder, Scott Kelly would not be unusual. Plenty of people try hard and don't end up becoming an astronaut. And plenty of people who do end up in elite positions didn't start from zero. They started from a relatively strong foundation and kept building. Kelly's story is about something else. Something that happened before the discipline kicked in. Before the hard work started, before any of the external stuff changed at all. There's a moment inside a bigger moment here. The moment everyone focuses on is he read the book. That's the visible thing, the catalyst. But the more interesting moment is what happened after he saw the gap between himself and the people he wanted to be like. Because that's where it could have ended. Most people, when they see that gap, take one look at it and say, that's for other people. People who started earlier. People who are smarter. People who grew up differently. Kelly didn't do that. Instead of treating the gap as proof he didn't belong, he treated it as proof of what he needed to work toward. And he didn't just change the way he thought, he started changing the way he operated. He became more serious about school. He improved his grades. Eventually, he earned a degree in electrical engineering, joined the Navy, became a pilot, and kept putting himself in positions that moved him closer to that world. But all of those actions came after something else happened first. He stopped seeing himself as someone on the outside looking in. So the question is why? And this is where the story becomes most revealing, because it wasn't skill that changed first. It wasn't grades or discipline or habits. It was his internal story about himself. He started thinking of himself as someone who could belong in that world, not someone who already did, not someone who had earned it, but someone who could. That's an incredibly specific and underrated distinction. Most people wait for proof before they give themselves permission to believe they're capable. They wait to call themselves a writer until someone publishes their work. They wait to call themselves an entrepreneur until the business is turning a profit. They wait to see themselves as someone who has their life together until everything finally looks the way they think it should. On the surface, that approach sounds perfectly logical. The problem is that it often keeps people stuck waiting for evidence that can only be created through action. Because your behavior follows your identity, not your circumstances. You don't act your way into a new self-image. You get the self-image first, and then the actions follow. Awkwardly and imperfectly over the years, but they follow. Scott Kelly didn't have evidence that he could be an astronaut. By every measurable standard available to him at 18, he was not on that path. But he shifted the internal story anyway. He decided he was the kind of person who could belong there. And then, crucially, he started acting like it. That 18-year gap between the book and the launch pad, that wasn't a gap between wanting something and getting it. That was 18 years of becoming someone who had actually earned the thing they wanted. One reason so many people stay stuck is that they're trying to change the results without first examining the story driving their behavior. Most people believe the thing standing between them and their goals is knowledge, a better strategy, the right system, a more effective plan, maybe discipline, maybe consistency. And sometimes it is those things. But way more often, the thing that's actually in the way is a quiet, unexamined story they're telling themselves about who they are. I'm not naturally disciplined. I've never been good at finishing things. People like me don't usually end up doing that. Those aren't facts. They're just stories that have been told enough times that they feel like facts. And as long as they're running in the background, all the strategies in the world don't fully take hold. You'll start and stop. You'll make progress and then quietly let it fall apart. You'll know exactly what to do and still not do it, which is incredibly frustrating, by the way, because it makes you feel like the problem is some kind of character flaw. It's not a character flaw. It's a story mismatch. The people who create results in their lives, not just occasionally, but consistently, almost always have one thing in common. Somewhere along the way, they stopped waiting for evidence and started acting from a decision about who they were, about what was possible, about whether the gap was a reason to quit or a reason to start. Scott Kelly looked at the gap and decided the gap was the starting point, not a stop sign. That's the whole thing. That's the move that everything else was built on. You can know every productivity hack, every morning routine, every goal-setting framework, and if the story running underneath all of it is this probably won't work for someone like me, you already know how that ends. But if you shift the story first, even before you have any evidence, even when it feels a little ridiculous, that's when things start to actually change. Not because believing something makes it magically true, but because what you believe about yourself determines what you're willing to attempt, how long you're willing to keep going, and whether you interpret setbacks as information or as proof. The gap between Scott Kelly at 18 and Scott Kelly at 36 wasn't just hard work. It was someone who decided in the absence of any evidence that the gap was closable, and then spent 18 years proving themselves right. If you're watching this and you need some one-on-one conversation with me where we can flesh out what you're dealing with, join my school community. The link is in the description. And please share this video with someone who's been having the same conversation with themselves. I'll see you in the next one.